Hello, everyone. This is StrawberryShorty back with another book from my childhood I never thought I would find, Our Solar System by Seymour Simon. And I think I actually found this the same day as the calendar one. Because if you search Solar System children's book, you're going to get like 20,000 results, and I didn't clearly remember what it looked like. But miraculously, I found it. Merry Christmas, William. Love, Mom. Why'd you give the book away? There's just the planets. Pluto, still a planet in this universe. I still consider Pluto a planet. Do you still consider Pluto a planet? This one is hard to record because it's a very big book. For a moment of the night, we have a glimpse of ourselves and of our world islanded in its stream of stars, voyaging between horizons across the eternal seas of space and time. Henry Beston, The Outermost House. I've always liked books about space and stuff. I don't know why. I also don't know where I got this book originally. This one is from Thrift Books. The Milky Way Galaxy and Our Solar System. The solar system was born among the billions of stars in the Milky Way Galaxy. About 4.6 billion years ago, a huge cloud of dust and hydrogen gas floating at the edges of the galaxy, began to pull together to form a globe. The particles packed more and more tightly together and became hotter and hotter. Finally, the enormous heat in the center of the globe set off a chain of nuclear explosions, and the sun began to shine. The blazing sun blasted away the nearby gases and dust into a spinning oval ring. As the particles in the ring began to cool, they clumped together into rocky or icy masses called planetesimals. They became the rest of the solar system: planets, moons, asteroids, meteoroids, and comets, and briefly Pluto. There's our solar system. There's Saturn all the way over there. It's basically Alaska. The sun is just an ordinary star among more than 100 billion stars in the galaxy. It is not the biggest or the brightest star, but the sun is the star nearest to our planet Earth and the center of the solar system. 9 planets travel around the sun in paths called orbits. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are called the inner planets. These 4 rocky planets are much smaller than the 4 giant outer planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Wow, Sailor Moon lied to us, which are made mostly of gases. Pluto is the smallest and outermost planet. 7 of the planets, including Earth, have moons circling around them. Thousands of minor planets, called asteroids, also orbit the sun. Many of these lumps of rock circle the sun in a broad asteroid belt between the orbits of the planets Mars and Jupiter. Still other smaller rocks, called meteoroids, as well as many other comets, travel around the sun. I didn't know the sun wasn't the biggest star, or that asteroids were technically planets. Why don't they get names? Is that Mars? That's the sun. The sun is huge compared to Earth. If the sun were hollow, it could hold 1.3 million Earths. Think of this. If Earth were the size of a basketball, the sun would be a giant globe as big as a basketball court. In fact, the sun is about 600 times bigger than all the planets, moons, asteroids, comets, and meteoroids in the solar system put together. The hydrogen is the sun's fuel. Like an endless hydrogen bomb, the sun uses about 4 million tons of hydrogen every second. Still, the sun has enough hydrogen to continue shining for another 5 to 6 billion years. The sun is all important to life on Earth. Green plants need sunlight to grow, animals eat plants for food, and we need animals and plants to live. Our weather and climate depend on the sun. Without the sun, there would be no heat, no light, no clouds, no rain, no living things on Earth. But I hope that's not true if it's not going to last forever. We will make our own sun. What is this? At the very center of the sun is its core, about as big as the planet Jupiter. Here, constant explosions raise the temperature as high as 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. Surrounding the core are 2 layers called the radiative zone and the convective zone. The sun's surface is called the photosphere, a sea of boiling gases about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But there are some hotter areas that form just like bubbles in boiling water. Giant storms called sunspots also erupt on the surface. Flaming streams of gases called prominences sometimes arch up from sunspots to the sun's atmosphere. Prominences can travel at speeds of 200 miles per second and stretch for more than 100,000 miles. The sun has an inner atmosphere called the chromosphere and an outer atmosphere called the corona. Corona. The corona stretches outward for millions of miles into space. During a total solar eclipse, the corona is visible as a halo around the sun. Corona is a disease from space. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It was named by the Romans after the fleet messenger of their gods. Mercury revolves quickly around the sun, but rotates very slowly on its axis, so a day on Mercury is almost as long as a year. Mercury is the second smallest planet in our solar system, after Pluto. Mercury is much smaller than Earth. In fact, it is smaller than Jupiter and Saturn's largest moons. Mercury itself has no moons. Mercury is often hard to spot because it is visible only during twilight hours on some days, close to the sun's bright glare. When Mercury is viewed from Earth through a telescope, it appears to change its shape from day to day, much the way our moon does. I've never looked through a telescope. That's the moon. Oh no, that's Mercury. Interesting. Maybe it is the moon. Maybe it's a comparison shot. The surface of Mercury is heavily cratered, like that of our moon. The larger craters were made by countless meteorites or asteroids crashing into the surface, which is not protected by an atmosphere. Many smaller craters also spot the terrain. Most of these were made when rocks thrown up from the impact of a meteorite came crashing back down. Mercury is almost an airless planet. Because Mercury is so close to the sun, the temperature rises above 750 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, hot enough to melt lead. Yet during the long nights, with no atmosphere to trap the heat, the temperature on the dark side drops to negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit, colder than the Earth's South Pole. Does anyone live on the South Pole? Venus is the brightest object in the night sky after our moon. The Romans named the brilliant planet Venus after their goddess of love and beauty. Venus is sometimes called the evening star of the morning star. But Venus is not a star. It is the second planet from the sun, after Mercury and just before Earth. Venus rotates from east to west, the opposite of most other planets and moons in the solar system. Venus is a bit smaller than Earth, and it has no moons. From Earth, Venus seems to change its shape just as our moon does. When it is close to Earth, Venus appears much larger than when it is on the other side of the sun. But the clouds covering the surface reflect light so well that Venus appears bright even when it is far away. Venus is sometimes called Earth's sister planet because they are about the same size. But Venus is very different from Earth. Like Earth, Venus is covered by thick layers of clouds. But there is very little water on Venus, so the clouds around it are not made of water droplets. Instead, they are composed of droplets of sulfuric acid. Below the cloud is a thick atmosphere of carbon dioxide. That place sounds scary. Venus is a scorching desert with temperatures of 900 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest planet in the solar system. Venus's atmosphere is mostly responsible for the intense heat. Sunlight passes through the atmosphere and heats the rocky surface. The rocks radiate heat, and the atmosphere traps the heat and doesn't allow it to escape. This is called the greenhouse effect because the glass windows in a greenhouse act the same way. NASA's Magellan spacecraft has been orbiting and photographing Venus since August 10th, 1990. It uses a special kind of radar that shows surface details down to the size of a football field, with 10 times the clarity of any previous photos. The global view of the surface of Venus was computer-produced from the first cycle of Magellan mapping. The colors are based on the images taken by the earlier Soviet spacecraft. Venus has large craters, but no small ones. That's because the planet's atmosphere is so dense that it stops smaller incoming meteorites before they can hit the ground and make a crater. Venus, very good at defense. And that's us. Earth might have been named oceans or water. That's because Earth is the only planet in the solar system with large amounts of liquid water on its surface and in its atmosphere. Earth is the third planet from the sun. If the sun were much closer, the seas would boil away. If the sun were farther away, the water would freeze over. The sun is just the right distance for life to exist on Earth. As far as we know, Earth is the only planet that has living things. I thought Mars had some kind of living things on it. Wasn't that a big deal? This photograph of Earth from space was taken by the Apollo 15 astronauts as they headed home from the moon. The brown places are land and the dark blue places are oceans. The white clouds are part of Earth's atmosphere. Earth is larger than Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto, but much smaller than Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. From space, Earth looks like a perfect ball. In fact, Earth is about 27 miles wider at the equator than at the poles. As it orbits the sun, Earth spins like a giant top. One complete spin is called a day. Earth is tilted a little to the one side as it travels around the sun. For part of the year, the northern half of Earth has summer because it is tilted toward the sun and gets more direct rays of sunlight for a longer part of the day. During that time, the southern half is tilted away, so it has winter. As Earth continues to orbit, the southern half is tilted towards the sun and has summer, while the northern half is tilted away and has winter. Earth is encircled by a protective blanket of air called the atmosphere, which helps keep the temperature fairly steady. The atmosphere is made up mostly of gases, nitrogen and oxygen, along with a small amount of carbon dioxide and tiny particles of dust and water. We live at the bottom of the atmosphere in a 5 to 10 mile layer of air called the troposphere. Most weather takes place in the troposphere. The photo shows the spinning clouds of a typhoon in the troposphere over the Pacific Ocean. This book is actually a lot longer than I remember. Earth is covered by a 5 to 30 mile deep layer of rocks called the crust. The solid crust floats on the mantle, a 1,800 mile thick layer of heavy, melted rock. The crust is cracked into a number of huge pieces called plates. Volcanoes and earthquakes shake the land where the plates meet each other, such as along the rim of the Pacific Ocean. Earth's crust is constantly changing. This is a photograph of a mountainous area in the western United States. Mountains are pushed up by the pressures within the earth. Cracks in the rocks called faults run through the crust. The rocks also wear away. Gravel washes down from the tops of mountains into the valleys below. In the winter, ice breaks up rocks. People also change the land. They farm the land and change the course of rivers to provide water. They dig into the land to gather rocks and minerals and use them to build roads and cities. Is that the moon? The moon is Earth's closest neighbor in space, only about 250,000 miles away. In space, that is very close. This photo of a crescent Earth over the barren landscape of the moon was taken by the Apollo 17 astronauts in December 1972. Earth and the moon are very close to each other in space, but they are very different. Earth is a blue, watery, cloud-covered planet filled with living things. The moon is a barren place with no water, no air, no clouds, no living things, except the aliens. The moon is Earth's only natural satellite. It is about 2,160 miles away, much smaller than Earth. We can see only the part of the moon lit by sunlight. So every night, the moon looks a little different. We call the changes in the moon's appearance phases. The phases go from an all-dark new moon to a silver called a crescent moon, to a full moon, and back again to a new moon in about 29 days. The moon's surface is covered by thousands of bowl-shaped craters. The craters are formed by rocky meteorites or asteroids crashing into the moon, which is not protected by an atmosphere. The 50-mile-wide crater at the top of the photo is called Copernicus, after a famous astronomer who lived long ago. Some craters are even larger, but most are smaller. Some are only a few feet wide. The moon's surface is also covered with mountains and hills and valleys and flatlands. In 1969 and the early 1970s, astronauts from the Apollo space program landed on the moon to gather information. Because the moon's gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth, the astronauts could easily move about on the moon's surface. The moon is about the same age as Earth, but the astronauts found that the soil and rocks are different. Scientists think that the moon was much hotter a long time ago, and that some of the elements on the surface were boiled off into space. I kind of thought Mars would be redder. Mars is the 4th planet from the sun. It appears so bright in the night sky because it is closer to us than any other planet except Venus. Because it shines with a red color, it made the early Romans think of blood and war. So they named the planet Mars after their god of war. People once imagined that Mars was covered by straight, dark lines. They thought these lines were giant canals built by intelligent Martians. But in the 1970s, unmanned spacecraft from Earth reached Mars. This view of Mars was sent back from a Viking spacecraft. It shows that Mars has craters, mountains, valleys, deeper and longer than the Grand Canyon, but no canals. The surface of Mars is covered by orange-red, dusty soil, which is blown from one spot to another by the wind in the very cold, thin atmosphere. The orange-red color is due to the presence of the chemical iron oxide in the soil and rocks. Millions of years when Mars was a young planet, water flowed on the surface. Some water may still remain hidden in underground reservoirs. Even though there is no liquid water on the surface, lots of ice covers the polar caps of Mars. Some of the ice is frozen water, and some is frozen carbon dioxide, also called dry ice. Is there life on Mars? 2 Viking landers were supposed to find out. A sample of soil was picked up by a robot arm on each lander and brought into a small computer-controlled biology laboratory on board. Experiments looked for any traces of life in the soil. Scientists are still arguing about the results. Many scientists think that the experiment showed that there is no life on Mars, but other scientists are not so sure. they say that, while we have not discovered life, it may still exist in some unexplored place on the planet. Do you think there's life on Mars? Jupiter is the giant planet of the solar system, more than 1.5 times as big as all the other planets put together. If Jupiter were hollow, more than 1,300 planet Earths could fit inside. Jupiter is the 5th planet from the Sun and was named after the ruler of the Roman gods. Jupiter is a gas planet of hydrogen and helium, covered by constantly moving clouds hundreds of miles thick. The clouds on Jupiter are not made of water droplets like clouds on Earth, but mostly hydrogen gas. One of the many mysteries on Jupiter is a giant windstorm called the Great Red Spot. It is nearly 3 times the size of the whole Earth. The spot was first seen through a telescope more than 300 years ago. At different times it has shrunk or grown, turned dull pink or become bright red, but it has not changed position and has kept the same oval shape for centuries. One of Voyager's most exciting discoveries was that Jupiter had a thin ring circling the planet. The photograph shows the edge of Jupiter, and part of the ring, right, it was taken in the planet's shadow after Voyager passed by Jupiter on its way to Saturn. All of the 4 giant outer planets, which are composed mostly of gases, have rings: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Jupiter is a planet unlike Earth in many ways. The temperature at the cloud tops is very cold, over 250 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing. Its surface is an ocean of liquid hydrogen that may be 10,000 or more miles deep. At its center, Jupiter is very hot. The heat from below stirs up the liquid hydrogen and the cloud tops so that they rise and sink. Life as we know it could not exist on Jupiter. Jupiter and the outer planets are strange and alien places that we have only begun to explore. Jupiter has at least 16 moons. The outer moons are small, most under 50 miles across. The 4 largest moons are named Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. These are called the Galilean moons, after Galileo, the great scientist who discovered them in 1610 with his small homemade telescope. Nearly 400 years after Galileo, the Voyager spaceships gave us a close-up looks at the moons of Jupiter. Ganymede is the biggest, larger than the planet Mercury. Europa is covered by a smooth ocean of ice. Callisto is ice, with small amounts of rock on top of a deep frozen ocean. Io, below, has something that no other moon in the solar system has: exploding volcanoes. The volcanoes often erupt, sending out flows of hot liquid sulfur. The surface of Io changes with each new eruption. The sulfur changes color as it cools. The black spot in the lower part of the photo is the crater of a dead volcano. I like this picture. Saturn is the 2nd largest planet after Jupiter. If Saturn were hollow, about 750 planet Earths could fit inside. Like Jupiter, Saturn is a gas planet made up of mostly hydrogen and helium. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun and was named after the Roman god of farming. The great scientist Galileo looked at Saturn through his low-powered telescope nearly 4 centuries ago. He was shocked to see what looked like ears on either side of the planet. Galileo decided that they were 2 smaller globes on either side of Saturn. About 50 years later, an astronomer with a stronger telescope saw that the 2 globes were really a flat ring around the planet. Even if you look through a powerful telescope on Earth, Saturn appears to have just a few rings, but the Voyager spacecraft took photos that show that the large rings are made of thousands of smaller rings within rings. There are so many rings around Saturn, they look like the grooves in a phonograph record. If you were to get even closer, you would see that the rings are made of pieces of ice. Some are as small as a fingernail, others as big as a house. The rings also contain dust and bits of rock. And all of the materials in the rings spin around Saturn like millions of tiny moons. The rings are nearly 170,000 miles across, but are less than 3 miles thick, and some are even thinner. How did the rings form? Some scientists think that the rings around the gas planets contain materials left over when the planets formed. Perhaps pieces of nearby moons that were chipped off by incoming meteorites helped to form the rings. No one knows for sure, so I think this recording is going to stop soon. I still have a lot of pages to go, so I may have to merge the recording. Saturn has the most moons of any planet in the solar system. More than 20 have been discovered, and there are probably others. Saturn has 1 large moon, 6 that are medium-sized, and at least 14 smaller ones. Most of Saturn's moons are ice-covered and pockmarked with craters. This picture of Saturn and some of its moons was made from a number of photographs taken by the Voyager. Saturn is partly hidden by Dione. Enceladus and Rhea are off in the distance to the upper left. Tethys and Mimas are cut off to the lower right. Those are Fire Emblem characters. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, is far away at the top right. Titan is bigger than the planets Mercury and Pluto. Titan is the only moon in the solar system known to have an atmosphere. The atmosphere is mostly nitrogen gas and covers the moon's surface with a thick haze. Okay. By the way, taking videos without using X Recorder takes up so much space. I'm going to have to edit all of those videos to make them smaller. So Uranus is the 7th planet from the Sun. Years after its discovery by William Herschel through a telescope in 1781, the planet was named Uranus after the Greek god of heaven and ruler of the world. Uranus is a ringed planet. I don't see any rings. Made up mostly of gases, about halfway in size between Jupiter and Earth. If Uranus were hollow, about 50 planet Earths could fit inside. In January 1986, 8.5 years after it had been launched from Earth, the Voyager 2 spacecraft swept past the pale blue-green clouds of Uranus. This photograph of Uranus was taken when Voyager was still 5 million miles from the planet. Uranus is lying on its side in space. At the moment, the south end of the axis around which the planet rotates is pointing at the Sun. Therefore, the South Pole is in the midst of 42 years of constant sunlight, while the North Pole is having a 42-year night. Gradually, the North Pole will point at the Sun, and it will have 42 years of sunlight while the South Pole will be dark. Uranus has 5 large moons and at least 10 smaller ones. This view shows part of Miranda, innermost of the 5 large moons, circling only 65,000 miles away from the cloud tops of ringed Uranus. Miranda is the strangest of the moons. Huge canyons, deep grooves, ridges, and rope-like markings cover its surface. All this on a moon only 300 miles across. Uranus has 11 thin rings, along with parts of other rings. The rings are made of chunks of unknown black material spinning around Uranus like lumps of coal on a merry-go-round. Ooh, I like this picture. Neptune is too far from Earth to be seen without a telescope. Galileo saw Neptune through a small telescope but mistook it for a star. It was first identified as a planet in 1846. Later, the planet was named Neptune after the Roman god of the sea. Neptune is just a bit smaller than Uranus. Neptune is a ringed planet with dark storms, giant hurricanes, and streaky white clouds of a methane ice that float 35 miles above the lower cloud deck. The largest storm is big enough to swallow our entire planet Earth. Strong, frigid winds in the atmosphere blow at the fastest speeds ever measured on a planet, up to 700 miles per hour. Methane in the atmosphere absorbs red light, which is the reason for the planet's blue color. Haze high above the clouds causes the red rim. 12 years and more than 2.8 billion miles after leaving Earth, Voyager 2 whizzed past Neptune on August 25, 1989. The spacecraft found that Neptune has 2 bright outer rings, a fainter inner ring, and a thin ring of dusty material. Scientists will need years to examine and understand all the information Voyager has provided about the outer planets. A world unlike any other is how scientists describe Neptune's moon Triton. Neptune has at least 2 large moons and 6 smaller ones. Triton is the biggest, about 1,700 miles across, nearly the same size as our own moon. Triton is colder than any other object ever measured in our solar system. Large parts of its surface look like the rind of an orange, with gigantic cracks across the surface. Triton was once a hot volcanic place, but now it is the frozen imprint of that earlier era. Pluto. Look at Pluto over there, all beautiful. Pluto is the 9th planet of the solar system and usually the most distant, but Pluto has an odd, stretched and tilted orbit, which brings it closer to the Sun than Neptune for 20 out of every 250 years. So between 1979 and 1999, Pluto is closer to the Sun than Neptune. Pluto was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh, a young American astronomer, in February 1930. The planet remained undiscovered for many years because it's so far from Earth and less than 2/3 the size of Earth's moon. Pluto was named after the Greek and Roman god of the underworld. The smallest and coldest planet in the solar system, Pluto, appears to be an ice ball of methane and water mixed with rock, surrounded by a thin atmosphere of methane gas. Scientists are still not sure whether Pluto is a Neptunian moon knocked out of orbit long ago or an asteroid that stayed straight into a distant orbit around the Sun. In 1978, astronomers discovered that tiny Pluto has a large moon of its own and named it Charon, after the boat that of the river Styx in the underworld, which Pluto rules. Charon has a diameter of almost 40% of Pluto's. The moon is so large compared to the planet it circles that Pluto and Charon are often called a double planet. Charon revolves close to Pluto and speeds through its orbit in only about 6 days and 9 hours. The photo of Pluto and Charon, upper right, was taken by the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990. The best ground-based image of the two, upper left, was taken with the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope in Hawaii. Odd name for a telescope. This is also a nice image, but it doesn't look real. It looks like a drawing. Asteroids are very small worlds that circle the sun, mainly between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, a region called the asteroid belt. About 3,000 asteroids have been discovered, but scientists think that there are many thousands more. Sometimes called minor planets, all the asteroids combined would not make a world as large as our moon. Most are only a few miles across. Ceres, about 600 miles in diameter, is by far the largest asteroid. Only Pallas and Vesta are more than 300 miles in diameter. Apollo asteroids are a small group that swings in close to the sun and may approach Earth. In 1937, a small asteroid, Hermes, came within 1 million miles of Earth. That's a close brush in space. Will an asteroid ever hit Earth, and what would happen if it did? Some scientists think that asteroids or comets have hit our planet in the past and may hit it in the future. They say that one such impact resulted in the extinction of the dinosaurs. That doesn't sound good. Comets orbit the sun, but they are quite unlike planets. When a comet approaches Earth, it may look spectacular, with a long glowing tail stretching far across the sky. But comets don't always look like that. Most comets circle around the dark edges of the solar system. Far from the sun, a comet is just a dirty snowball, a frozen ball of ice a few miles wide, covered by a layer of black dust. This small dark body is the comet's nucleus. When a comet sweeps in toward the sun, it begins to change. The pressure of sunlight streams of particles from the sun sweep dust off the comet's surface and evaporate some of the ice. The dust and gas begin to glow and form first a halo called the coma, and then finally a tail, which may stretch millions of miles. This 1986 photo of Halley's Comet was taken from the Giotto spacecraft. The nucleus, only 12,000 miles away, is the dark spot at the upper left. The bright area in the center is a dust jet lit up by sunlight. Meteoroids are small pieces of metal or rock that have been swept off asteroids or comets. We can't see them in space, but when a meteoroid enters Earth's atmosphere, we see a bright streak of light flashing across the sky. They are called meteors. A few of the large ones may fall to the surface as meteorites. Your chance of being hit by a meteorite are not very great, much less than your chances of being struck by lightning. But if you do get struck by one, you may become a ghost with special powers. Just saying. Look at this image. Our bodies are made up of some of the same atoms that formed the sun and stars and created planets, moons, asteroids, comets, and meteoroids. Truly, we are all children of the universe. Does that make me a planet? This is just a glossary. And the planet thing again. That was a long one. That took a long time to read. So what did you think? What is your favorite planet? Do you think Pluto is still a planet? What did you learn that is interesting to you? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Bye!